We're here with Norah O'Neill, the very first 747 female pilot and pilot with the Flying Tigers.
I was making more as a waitress than I would have as a starting newspaper writer. But the truth is I just wasn't quite ready for this 7-day week, 9-to-5 job. I just wasn't. So it wasn't really the money. It was, I needed to go ski.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
I needed to go ski. I had been, studying and so I went to ski and then I was going to get a real job. From skiing in Sun Valley, I was hired to model in a modeling job in Mount McKinley, 10,000 feet up the side of Mount McKinley. And we were dropped off in a single-engine ski plane by Alaska's premier bush pilot, Don Sheldon. And it was in seeing that bird's eye view out of the front of this small plane. Of course, I'd flown in jets before in the back, and the view's not all that hot. I mean, it was cool, but in the front, I remember saying to the pilot, how hard is this to learn how to do?
So you instantly knew that this is what you wanted?
I knew that I wanted this view again. I think I fell in love with a bird's eye view. I wanted to learn how to do it so I could have that experience again, because in Alaska, we're flying over land that nobody's been on since the dinosaurs. And as far as the eye could see, there's no sign of man. I mean, it was absolutely this gorgeous, unspoiled terrain.
It's beautiful.
Alaska was so beautiful. It is so beautiful. And I came down from the mountain and got a nighttime job in an Alaskan bar, 9 at night till 5 in the morning. And it was on Kodiak Island. And it was the bar that the prostitutes worked out of. So it was the most popular bar. And I made enough money there to learn how to fly during the day. And it was an eye-opening experience. I had never been around prostitutes before, and I was amazed. Some of them were younger than I was. And they were very warm and welcoming. But working in the bar overall experience was fairly unpleasant.
Right.
Because people drank too much. I earned enough money for my private commercial instrument flight instructors, and then thought, by that time I was really hooked, wanted to fly some more. It never occurred to me as this started that I would ever fly for a living. That was never a thought. First of all, there were no women airline pilots yet. There were no women pilots allowed in the military. The WASP had flown during World War II, and none of them could find jobs after the war ended. I mean, they definitely got screwed over.
Yeah.
And no, it didn't occur to me that it would be a career. I needed to continue flying. The Alaskan pipeline was being built, and they were getting short on pilots. And they were so desperate for flight instructors that they hired me. And that started it. The weather was so extreme in the winters that if you had a problem with a plane and had to put it down somewhere, there were plenty of places, often there were plenty of places to put it down, but could you be rescued in time?
Right.
And if you were injured at all, being exposed to minus 60 degrees, and it was difficult to survive. I had started as a flight instructor, and they were so busy that one day they desperately needed a pilot. They had a plane there, and I was there without a student, and they said, hey, fly this load of people over to so-and-so place, someplace I'd never been, but hey, it was really fun to find new places, so off I went. I never had a solid picture of how good I was getting, because all I could see is that I had more to learn.
Right.
And that I couldn't believe sometimes that I was licensed, because I felt like I didn't know very much. But the truth was, I was learning more and more and more, and I definitely maximized my time in airplanes. I just knew that I had good judgment, that I wasn't going to push things to a limit that would endanger me or the airplane. The men who worked for the same company as me said that they were embarrassed to fly for a company that would hire a woman because they thought that showed that they had a very low standard set for the kind of pilots they would hire. And that kind of undermined my confidence. But I kept bringing the planes back. They just couldn't, they didn't know how to be professional with me other than to try to run me out. But I was pretty and young. And
Right.
so there was a certain element of, if she could do it, if somebody who looks like my daughter or my girlfriend can do it, then, you know, then I can't brag about how cool I am to go out here and fight the weather and land in these places. And then they hired, the company was growing, and they hired some guys who had been laid off from airlines in the US. So they were airline pilots, like an American airline pilot and Western airline pilot. They came up and they were so grateful to have jobs. They moved the family up, and they certainly didn't care. And then also the people who flew in the pipeline, we had the contract for medical evacuations north of the Yukon. So we had to be stationed in camps. There were no women in any of the camps yet. They didn't want women in the camps. And the guys' wives didn't want me in the same room as their husbands at the camps because they were assigned a room with 2 beds. So that was a difficulty. And that ended up with my boss saying, I'm gonna have to let you go. And I asked if I got a fully qualified co-pilot, if he would hire that person. And he said yes. And it happened that one of my favorite flight instructors called that night. He was getting out of the military. He had been moonlighting as a flight instructor. And he said, Nora, can you help me get a job in Alaska? And I said, would you mind flying as my co-pilot? He goes, of course not. And so Rex Gray came up to fly as my co-pilot, was hired by Alaska Central Air as my co-pilot. And so basically, Rex and I loved flying together, and we had such a good time that after months of him coming back and saying, gee, flying with Nora is so great, I fly half all legs and she never tells me what to do, the guys were saying, how come only Rex gets to fly with Nora? On a fluke, I knew that all the guys I worked with were applying to the airlines. And everybody was applying to Flying Tigers because they were such a wonderful company. I flew 747s and DC-8s around the earth. All the guys had applications in. And so one day, while sitting in Prudhoe Bay, the end of the end terminus of the Alaskan pipeline, I was bored, all the phone calls were free up there. So I picked up the phone and called Flying Tigers in LA. And I said, you know, I'm a pilot in Alaska and I have this many hours and this many licenses and I'm interested in working for Flying Tigers. And he said, how did you know we were going to hire? We just decided this morning. And I said, I didn't, you know. A lot of guys I work with have talked about Flying Tigers. And he goes, well, let me go get your application and I'll look at it. And I go, well, I haven't even applied. So he agreed to send me an application, and I said, I'm coming down in 2 weeks to see my parents in San Diego, so why don't I stop by LA and see you then? And that's how I got my airline interview. When I told the guys that, they were amazed. They'd been sending roses to chief pilot secretaries for years, trying to get the foot in the door and to get an interview. Getting an airline interview was huge. One thing I realized as I wrote my book is that my bad experiences at the airline were so horrific to me emotionally that I ended up going out just waiting for the next bad thing, rather than concentrating on the good and just going, this is a bad thing. Yes, it is a bad thing, but I only have to fly with this person for 3 days and I'm not going to let it color my life, which would be the mature thing to do, what I would do now. I didn't do that then. So I ended up going out to the plane kind of walking on eggshells. And that led to me not being able to perform as well as I could have. And part of it was because I was the first woman. Part of it was because I was young. I had no mentors. I had no women to ask for advice. As it turned out, in 1978, the first 21 of us hired in the U.S. as airline pilots got together and founded the International Society of Women Airline Pilots, which is still in existence. It's given out millions of dollars in scholarships to women who want to pursue a career in aviation. So I had some experiences flying into other countries that my fellow female pilots did not have, that were more colorful.
Right.
And I also had more press in that I was landing in countries where they never had a female airline pilot land before, so they were sending out the newspapers, which Tigers liked because it got their name in the paper, but my experience with doing PR for the company was that it almost always had a very negative effect with the men I flew with. They would go, why do they always ask her? I've been here longer and I'm more experienced, you know? And I found myself apologizing to them for all this distraction and fuss, which wasn't my fault.
Right.
Rather than saying, hey, I'm doing my bit for the company, it's paying our paychecks, so be quiet, which is what I would say now. But again, back to, you know, when we started careers, and this is true for women in any profession, we're not sure, you know, we want to fit in. We put up with things that we maybe shouldn't put up with. We don't want to tell on people because nobody wants to be a tattletale. But they're truly things that should be reported.
Yeah.
And nowadays, you know, women should report bad incidents because what, in my experience, even though my generation opened a lot of doors and a lot of men got used to women doing the job and they believe that the women can do the job, every generation produces new idiots. If I had it to do over again, I would do it differently. I would get help sooner. I would report people sooner. You know, after my first year there, I shouldn't have had to put up with any more of that stuff. I should have reported them. I would have coped with it differently.
How did you cope with it?
I exercised a lot.
Take out your aggression that way?
Yeah. Yeah. I drank. Because that dulled it. I eventually had to quit drinking. And to do that, I needed to get help. And I took a few years off, got sober, went to 12-step programs, got professional help. All this was monitored by the FAA because I wanted to return to work. And they have very strict rules for airline pilots. And as an airline pilot, if you have a problem with drinking, if you tell on yourself, you can keep your job and they'll pay for rehab. If you bring it to work, you're fired.
Right.
So I told it myself, got the help, came back after 3 years. And the cool thing about that was I got to write my book. I finally had time to write the book.
Right. So how would you cope with it now?
Now, get professional help. Go to my union. They had professional help, and the unions have, the Airline Pilots Association has the committee that deals only with people having a problem with other pilots. So rather than telling your manager, you can go to the union and say, I'm having a problem with this pilot. And the union would set up peers to mediate between the two people. Professional Standards Committee. And that, eventually, is what I did do. I always knew I had to write a book someday. And it happened that writing a book about my experiences was the easiest book to write. What I wanted to do was to put down the real truth of what had happened to the first women who crossed the cockpit threshold in this country.